In this episode of the Exploring Information Security podcast, what is risky business?
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring Information Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I am your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we'll be exploring what is risky business. With me to do that is Patrick Gray, the creator, the founder, the man, the myth, the legend. He pretty much set up Risky Business. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. You can support the podcast by giving me feedback. Timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. If you want to connect, let me know you listen to the show because I get a lot of LinkedIn requests. You can also rate the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. So upcoming events, I will be at B-Sides Greenville, which is going to be next month, September 21st, 2024. So if you listen to this after that, it's over. But look for, future events in your timeline. I will also be at B-Sides Augusta, October 5th. And I highly recommend both B-Sides events if you're in the Southeast area. There's some of the good security conferences going on, very community driven. Yes, it's on a weekend, but that's when the people that are really into the community show up and participate. And it's a really great way to network and meet and discuss security topics with people. So, and if you're going, let me know. We can meet up. Practisec.com. They currently, I believe he still has it going on. Yes, there's the PWAPT and PBAT going on in September and October. He has a discount for the bundle. That's Tim Tomes, by the way. Really great AppSec. I've sent several people to those courses, and they've all come away with lots of really good training that they can apply to, a pen test, web app, application security role. So definitely recommend that. So thoughts on this episode. Patrick is someone I've been listening to for 10 years. When I first got into the industry, my first job, I listened to podcasts. His was probably the second I picked up, but this is one that I've stuck with too, because he does a great job of covering the news items, so that allows me to, keep my thumb on the pulse, and he has a really good take. Surprise, surprise! People outside of the U.S. have a really good take on stuff. Very balanced and very well done journalism. You'll hear us kind of talk about that a little bit, but I would absolutely recommend his podcast, and of course, here we kind of talk about the origins of it and get into a little bit of podcasting and some of the nuances around it. I don't think people realize that there's a lot of different nuances around it. So definitely excited for this one. He's definitely a big get. It took some scheduling, was a little bit long, but we finally got it done, and I'm super stoked for this episode. So with that, let's get into it. And we kind of started with the origins of Risky Business, and
off we go. So hit me.
So what got you started in podcasting? What's the origin of Risky Business?
The origin of Risky Business. So that's a good one. That's a good question, because it was totally a shower idea. Literally came to me in the shower. At the time, I had been a technology journalist for a few years, covering cybersecurity, because I'd always had an interest in it. So my journalism career started 2001, and I started off as a freelancer. Really, I just submitted stuff to. Okay, I'll go back. I'm going to tell you the whole story. Sorry, you're going to get the long version. So, around 2001, a friend of a friend was a sub-editor at Melbourne's newspaper, The Age, and he was a member of a Wi-Fi enthusiasts group, and my mate was a member, and we're all sitting around having a beer. And I got stuck into the guy who worked at The Age, and I'm like, look, your cybersecurity coverage, back then we didn't call it cybersecurity coverage. It was InfoSec coverage or whatever. I said, look, I think it's not very good. I think you're missing a lot. And back in those days, the newspapers had these big, fat Tuesday technology sections, right? Because there was a lot of money in technology advertising and whatever. So all the newspapers had these big tech sections. And I'm like, I just don't think the coverage is very good. And he said to me what any good editor will say, which is, well, if you think it's no good, how about you write something for us? So I did. And initially it was sort of published in what I would submit was published in the letters section. And after they published a few, I got a call from his boss saying, look, we need to register you as a freelancer and start paying you for these, because otherwise the union is going to get really annoyed with us, right? Because then it's just, basically free content. And, we like your contributions. So that was kind of how I started in journalism. And then I just kept doing more and more of that. Eventually, pretty quickly, actually, I was offered a job with ZDNet in Sydney. So I worked on their news desk as their cybersecurity reporter. And then I did not like living in Sydney. It's just not my kind of city. So I only lasted a year in that job, and resigned, and then just went freelance again. But my freelancing went really well. So I was writing for Security Focus. I was writing for Wired. Did some non-cybersecurity stuff. I dabbled. So I was writing for Men's Style Australia. I did a little bit for Business Week in the United States. Still a lot for Fairfax Media, which is The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. So yeah, had a great little freelance career. Moved to a beautiful beach town on the east coast of Australia called Byron Bay, and quickly got bored, because part of freelancing life is there's the stories you write that are interesting. And unfortunately, there's a lot of the same, right? So back then it was writing about the latest worm, writing about the latest vulnerability. The issues were different. The appetite for, what sort of content editors wanted wasn't always the most interesting stuff. And of course, if you're a full-time freelancer, you've got to make a salary somehow. So I was finding myself writing about enterprise storage solutions, doing case studies and features and really boring stuff. So I'd been thinking about doing my own thing. And the other thing too is the cybersecurity content I was writing was for newspaper audiences and for a general tech audience. And I felt like I wanted to be doing security content for security people. And at that point, there weren't really too many places you could publish that. A lot of them didn't have budgets, right? So I'm thinking, I want to do my own thing. And everyone, like at that time, blogs were the thing, right? So everyone was doing blogs. Everyone was a blogger. And I had done radio previously. When I was a teenager, I volunteered at a community radio station. Later on, when I lived in Sydney, I was lucky enough to contribute to a ABC program called Net News. So I'd spend half a day every week at ABC Studios in Ultimo, working under a guy called John Barron, who now does a TV show here in Australia. He's quite a well-known guy, and he was a terrific mentor. So yeah, I'm in the shower one day in 2006. And I just thought, hey, I'll do a podcast. Why not? And keep in mind, this is pre-smartphone, right? So me, being an idiot, thinks, oh, okay, I'll do a podcast, when podcasts really just weren't a thing. This is back in the day where people would have to download them and then sync them onto their iPods because iPhones didn't exist.
Apple was the only ecosystem at that point, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I got out of the shower and I rang a marketing manager who was, there was those companies that they all merged and whatever. They wound up being Verizon Security, but I think back then it was like Cybertrust or something. So I rang Wendy, who was a marketing manager who I'd had dealings with as a journalist. And I said, hey, I just had an idea, which is I could start a podcast. I'm still wet when I have this phone conversation. Like I come out of the shower, I got a towel. I'm still dripping, and I'm like, I'm just going to make that phone call. And I said, if I spun up a podcast about security, do you think anyone would be interested in sponsoring it? And I wasn't fishing for her to say yes. She was someone whose opinion I trusted and asked her, and she said, send us a purchase order. So I think, straight off the bat, it was like a couple $100 an episode kind of thing. But it got me out of doing already, even at a couple of $100 a week, got me out of doing the boring work I was doing. And from her perspective, it was a great way to do media training for her staff through these sponsored clips, and they could promote it internally or whatever. And meanwhile, I asked my editors, who I was still freelancing for, hey, if I submit articles to you, would you mind including at the bottom of the article that I'm hosting this new podcast? And they all said that was fine. And that's how it got going. And I think within about 3 months, it became my full-time job, which was surprising. And back then, there was no marketing budget spend for podcasts. So I like to say that pretty early on, I wound up with what I'd call sort of patrons or benefactors as opposed to sponsors. But there were a few companies that just decided to back it because they thought it was good. One of them being Tenable, which way back then, they were very early to figure out that podcasts were an effective way to advertise. And on and on, it just went from there. So that's the story of my career so far.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, I mean, and what I've always been impressed with your podcast is you can really dive into the technical details, but like you said, you started as like a tech journalist. So, like, is that just a lot of research? I know you have Adam Barlow on the show that, you know, is kind of your technical person that is a pen tester. But, like, what's that process been like of trying to really dive in? Because it's just it's you blow me away a lot of times talking about some of these little details within the technology itself. Like, you're not just covering the news. You're actually diving into some of the technical reasons this is happening or that's happening.
Well, I mean, I've always found it interesting, and that's my best mate is to blame. He's still my best friend. We've known each other since we were children, and he's a hacker. These days, a security guy, but he's a hacker in his DNA. And my high school had a lot of hackers in it, you know. So that's kind of how that happened. And he spun up a business. I sort of helped him out a little bit on that. This is when we're both really young, both very, very young, but. You know, I learned a lot from him just being around him, which is why I was always interested in those details, which is why I lost interest in doing InfoSec reporting for newspapers, because really, to me, the interesting thing would always be a little bit deeper than whatever it is that you would present to a general tech audience. So it's so funny because people often say, I've even won awards, journalism awards, where they say, you know, Patrick's found a way to make something really dry interesting. But I've always thought that's weird because to me, it's not a dry topic. To me, it's very interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons that, you know, Risky Business has been successful is because I'm not faking my enthusiasm for this topic. I mean, I've been reporting on InfoSec for 23 years and I still find it interesting, right? So I think that's probably why I'm happy to go a bit deeper is I want to know how these things work. You know, and I'm not a particularly technical person myself. But I'm interested enough to try to understand, I guess, a little bit more than the average person, at least. And I will just say too, I have a bit of a cough at the moment, so listeners are going to have to deal with that.
Well, if I can edit it out, which I will try to do, but you're not the first person. The worst is kind of a side thing. The worst is the ums. Like I used to have to edit out. Like if I listen to a guest and they're saying, and I recognize they're saying enough. I will go back and start editing out like a bunch of ums because I notice it and it just just drives me nuts. So I know it'll drive listeners nuts.
Tolerance is it's a personal choice. Depends on who you're interviewing. Yeah. I'll take out some, not others. Depends.
Yeah, you want to keep the conversation.
I've edited a few podcasts myself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what I also love about even your technical stuff is it's a very honest and like intelligent take on a lot of these things. And the other thing too is that you'll come back and correct yourself, which I don't hear a lot of people doing, even in journalism in general, right? And maybe they do, maybe they do a redaction, but you come back and go, okay, we have a correction from previous because someone talked to me and give me some more insight. Right?
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that because having had experience as a journalist, both on staff and as a freelancer, the prevailing attitude in media is that protecting the masthead is incredibly important. And the way they feel you need to protect the masthead is you always back your people and you always back your coverage. You always stand by the story. The threshold for doing a retraction or a correction is incredibly high. And to me, even before I was a publisher, even when I was a technology journalist, I thought that was a deeply strange way to try to protect your brand. I think if you really want your audience to trust you, you don't dig in when you're wrong. That's insane. To me, that's nuts. If you get something wrong, you come out and you say, I got something wrong. And what you get with that is an awful lot. You get trust because your audience will know that if you misled them, you will correct it. And to me, that's way more powerful than digging in behind a story that's inaccurate. It drives me nuts. And I get, and it also, I find it really weird that people praise me for this because I just think it's so, it's just so logical. Like,
Right, yeah.
that if you fuck something up, and excuse my language, that you come out the next week and you're like, I fucked that up. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
because it's all about trust. It's all about trust. And I don't think you earn trust by sticking by shit reporting.
Yeah.
No.
You're absolutely, and I think that gives your podcast some genuineness and again honesty, right? And I know you're thinking that's something that just should be done, but it just feels like, especially in today's age, it doesn't get done enough. So I think it's a lot appreciated for people like me who, again, I've been listening to it for 10 years, and it's my ride into work because it allows me, because you cover the entire landscape, every news item and everything below the news item, because I do my daytime job now is security awareness, and so I need to have my thumb on the pulse to be able to identify what's a concern for the security team, but then what's a concern for the general population.
Yeah. I mean, we can't cover, like it used to be in the early days, we could cover literally everything that happened that week, right?
Nope.
But the news these days is an absolute fire hose, and that's why we've hired others, right? So we've got Catalin Kimpanu, who was a journalist that we admired for years and years and years. He worked for Bleeping Computer, then went to ZDNet, then he went to The Record for a while. And now he works for us, and he's been with us for a couple of years now, and he writes the Risky Business newsletter, which is just, I think he publishes something like 7,000 words a week.
It's like 3 newsletters a week, right?
Yeah. And we turn them into podcast news bulletins as well in our second podcast channel. But yeah, so that's the other thing that's happened, I guess, lately is we're 5 people now. You mentioned that Adam Boileau is a pen tester. Adam Boileau was a pen tester. Now he's our technology editor, right? So he's with us full time, has been for like 6 months. Catalin, we've got on board as well. We've got Tom Uren. He was at the Australian Signals Directorate, which is Australia's NSA. He was there for 15 years, and now he's with us. And it's a great little business and growing.
Yeah, it feels like it's kind of just blown up over the last few years. Is that how you feel the podcast? Like you were kind of chugging along, and then all of a sudden you were just able to expand, or did you kind of just need to expand?
I think it was just time, and also I had kids, which meant. I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old now, right? So it means I'm not traveling as much and whatever, and I'm kind of pinned down in one place, and I'm like, all right, I'll take my business seriously. Fine.
I got more mouths to feed. Huh?
Yeah, and it's also like for a long time, it's sort of been the Pat Gray company, and I want to turn it into something bigger than myself, right? Because I'm not going to do this forever. I started this podcast when I was in my 20s, and I'm closer to 50 than 40 now. So eventually I'm going to have to find a way to turn it over, to turn it into something that's bigger than me, and that's been a part of it. And it's been going pretty well. I got to be honest. Like it's slow and steady. We're probably going to make another couple of hires next year, and it's interesting that we're sort of swimming against the current because the wider media ecosystem and tech media in particular. I mean, it's a bloodbath out there, and that's I think because. Back in the day, think of all of the computer magazines that you would see at a newsagent or whatever. A lot of them are gone. And that's because these days, if you want to know if a motherboard's any good or whatever, your chances are you're watching someone tear it down on YouTube, right? So we've got this, the sort of influencer media has displaced journalism media. And I guess that's what makes us a little bit different is even though I come from a journalism background, I've tried to sort of, straddle that line between being, quote unquote, internet personality versus journal. You kind of got to do both. And I think, the influencer types don't understand journalism enough. And I think a lot of them engage in some pretty unethical practices. And I think on the journalism side, they don't engage with their audience enough in the way that influencers are really good at. So I don't know, and I hate using the word influencer, by the way. I never want to be a self-described influencer, but we try to learn a little bit from those people and straddle both, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been succeeding when in a really tough industry. So yeah, I'm very, very happy with how things are going, but I have had to ponder like why, and I think that's the best answer I could come up with in my head.
Yeah, I mean, you guys just released going on to YouTube like you're actually doing video now, right? And
Yeah.
I guess is that kind of why you're doing that? Is because you recognize that you need to have a face out there? Because I've always sort of that, like with my own podcast. To me, it's like video just adds some more complications, right? You're doing editing. You're like we did this before where you found out it was audio, right? And you're like, oh, let me put on my headphones. Let me do all this other stuff because you don't have to look at the and you got to like look at the camera and make sure you're paying attention. Like is that kind of why you felt like you had to go that route, or?
No, I mean for me it was more that I think one thing I've learned is that people tend to consume media in a certain way. So there's a whole bunch of people out there who watch YouTube but don't listen to podcasts. And there's a whole bunch of people out there who listen to podcasts and don't consume YouTube. So I just realized there's like a pretty big audience out there that we're just not going anywhere near. So considering we're already doing the content, we should repurpose it. Which is why, I mean, you're looking at me via a video connection now, and I've done all my studio lighting, and it's looking good. We haven't released a new video with the new studio lighting. Like, I literally finished the setup yesterday. But,
nice.
May as well repurpose that content. And I'm doing those edits myself. Adam's doing the audio edits these days, which I did for, a long, long time. As I joked to him, I'm like, it's your turn, buddy. Because production is pretty laborious. So at the moment, I'm doing the video edits, but we're probably going to hire a producer, because between all of us, like we need one at this point because we're all doing it ourselves. And, that's the thinking. And so far it's going pretty well. I mean, we've done 2 weekly shows on YouTube now. One of them did about 1,600 downloads. Another one did, the most recent one, it's like up to 850, but it'll probably settle at around 1,500 after a week or so. But I mean, it's, dwarfed by our audio numbers, which are sort of circa 25,000 per episode. But we're just starting, right? We're starting from zero. So I think, and I really did take a look around YouTube too, and I couldn't find much in like similar to what we do. Like there's really not much out there. So I just thought, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I think I read something recently where it was like the third highest search engine is like YouTube. So everyone, and it makes sense too, right? And I had the same thing where I have someone in the tech field, and they're like, I was like, yeah, I'm starting my podcast back up, and they're like, oh, well, where's it at? And I was like, it's this, and this. And like, well, I only do it on YouTube. And I was like,
yeah,
oh, okay. But YouTube's made it super easy. I just throw the RSS feed up there, and then it just uploads the video. And I keep getting hit up by marketing people that want to like pretty up my YouTube page, but I've only got like 5 people, and I just started throwing them out there. So, but to your point, I expect that to grow.
Well, and there's the discoverability side to YouTube as well. That's another reason to do it, where I can already tell by looking at the sort of analytics page that YouTube is putting it in front of people who otherwise might not have heard of us, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think it's like, I always treated Risky Biz as kind of like, if you're in the know, you listen to Risky Business, right? It was almost like it had to be word of mouth, right? Because we always wanted that audience of absolute security tragics. We didn't want to advertise.
Right.
But I guess now, turning into a grown-up sort of media company, it's time to, to just do things a little bit more properly, I guess. And the YouTube push is part of that. And from there, one thing I noticed too is I started publishing like little video excerpts from our audio show, just short clips, like 1 minute. And I started putting them out on Twitter or X or whatever the hell we're calling it these days.
TikTok? You on TikTok yet?
Not yet, but we probably will, right? Because these little clips, what I noticed is when you publish them, we'd noticed a bit of a kick in downloads, but from existing subscribers. So it's almost like people see them on social media and they see a minute of that conversation. They're like, oh, that's good. And then the clip ends and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll go listen to the whole thing. So I noticed that as a way to sort of market your content, like those little short video clips are pretty good. So yeah, we'll do the YouTube thing, and then we'll do YouTube Shorts, and we'll have one of these producers who can then throw out these little short clips all over the various social media platforms and whatever, and just sort of try to drive subs a bit, which we've never done. But as I say, we're all grown up now.
Yeah, not having more subscribers. I imagine sponsors, and that's what they're looking for, right? Is the numbers and your reach within.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that's
really?
True.
Okay.
Actually, really. I think it's, and I think this is sort of misunderstood by people outside of media. What sponsors and advertisers care about, if you're selling Coca-Cola, yeah, you care about reach. If you're selling a $10 million project, involving security software to some Fortune 500 company, you don't care about 1 million people listening to that. There's 500 people you care about listening to that, you know? And that's the valuable thing in a business like ours, is not so much reaching, you know, a wide audience. It's about reaching the right audience. And, you know, there's all of these, you know, terms that you would have seen in rate cards and sponsorship packs about we reach decision makers. You know, everybody always reaches the decision makers, which is funny, right? If you believe their media. But, you know, I think we do. We actually reach people who are making these decisions and doing these things. And we, you know, and we try to not send them in the wrong direction. We work to vet sponsors as much as we can. Sometimes someone might slip through who's not great and they don't last long. So we definitely try to do some quality control on our sponsors. And I think that's another thing where we're a little bit different, is we don't just have a sales team that will sell sponsorships to anyone, you know, which is why we're free to trash an awful lot of vendors on our show. And we have trash sponsors as well. In our editorial sections, like, just because you're a sponsor on Risky Biz doesn't mean we're going to go easy on you. But, you know, our sponsors will take it on the chin when they've done something wrong, and that's fine.
I think that's the other thing with your podcast, is that all the vendors you have on are great. So, and it shows in the fact that you like vet and make sure that they're actual quality and that they can speak to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the bar is you got to be doing something that's useful for people. You know, it's you know, you would think that's a pretty low bar, but you know, we just won't push something out if it's obviously a waste of people's time or obviously bad. Sometimes we'll push out like early stage companies that are maybe building a category that's not proven yet. So we took on Attack IQ when attack and breach simulation was really not something anyone was doing. They were very early to that, you know, and they're not a sponsor anymore. But that's an established category now. So, you know, in that case, we took them on just because we're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. This is new. You know, let's have that conversation. Let's find out. And to get paid to do that is amazing, really.
Did you have to have a conversation with some of the vendors too, because I've heard you talk to vendors and you're really like kind of pinning them down when you feel like they're just spewing some sort of bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, we're a big fan of real talk, I guess. Yeah. We put it that way. You know what I mean? So it's like, come on, you know, let's just be real for a minute.
But you also like you don't do it in like a very like an egregious way or like insulting the thing, but you're just kind of questioning.
No, it's not about being aggressive. No, but it's about elicitation. It's like, no, come on, you know, like let's just have a real conversation. And I think, funnily enough, a lot of them actually really appreciate that because they get to step away from the boilerplate, bullet point based marketing talking points, right? Like, you know, a couple of the more established companies, you know, I interviewed the CEO of Corelight recently, and afterwards he's like, man, that was so much fun. He's like, I don't get to have many conversations like this anymore. And I heard the same from Owen Hinchy, who's the founder of Tynes. You know, because as the companies grow and stuff, they spend a lot more time speaking to like Wall Street analysts, I guess, or, you know, whatever, than being able to actually sit down and talk about nuts and bolts tech, right? So, and for the startup people, it's fun too, because you get to have really that conversation about what they're doing, and, you know, they feel that it's great when they get to talk to someone who kind of understands what they're trying to do. So, yeah, I mean, I always want our sponsored content to actually be valuable to listeners, as opposed to just a turgid regurgitation of marketing talking points, right? Like that's the goal. And we have sacked vendors in the past who, even though they make good tech, they give us boring interviews. It's like, well, bye. You know, we're trying to keep people informed and entertained here, you know? So we're always trying to design that sponsor mix to, you know, so it's good tech, or at least has the potential to be good, and they're giving us good content.
So have you noticed like just a massive increase in vendors since you deal with vendors on a regular basis? Because I feel like 10 years ago, right, there was maybe 4 or 5 in like a given field, but now it just seems like, and that's where I think your podcast really shines too, is you can bring forth some of the better vendors in like a sea of vendors. And an example is, security awareness. I've only heard of No before, but I recently heard about like 5 other vendors just on security awareness, and it just seems like they've just kind of exploded all over the place.
Yeah, it's nuts. What's that? There's that graphic that goes around once a year. It's like some bank or whatever that puts it together, and it shows all of the logos of like the top, and it's just this like, sea of logos. Yeah, I mean, look, compared to 23 years ago when I really started in journalism in this field, and going right back to the start of this conversation, the reason that the newspaper in Melbourne's coverage sucked is because the only people journalists were talking to would be like their local Symantec rep or local McAfee rep. Like it was the AV industry basically, and maybe a couple small vendors. Snort existed as an open source project, but SourceFire wasn't a company really like that was doing much. And there just wasn't much. There wasn't much going on back then. Whereas now there's just a million vendors in every category. There's an awful lot of stupid stuff out there as well. There's a lot of dumb stuff that's not going anywhere. And there's just, a lot of duplication of effort. I think competition's healthy, but I think when you've got, 50 vendors doing the same thing, hello threat intelligence, it's, it's a bit nuts. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more out there. We're lucky in that we get to pick, like 30, 35 vendors every year that we work with. We've probably got 150 who've expressed active interest at the moment, who we'd throw basically onto a waiting list. And the reason is a lot of the time you just fire it up and it's just not that interesting. It's nothing new. They might be trying to recreate something that doesn't need to be recreated. It's wild out there, but I think it's changing. The VC boom that came around through zero interest rates was just insane. Like there was a lot of stuff getting funded that shouldn't have. Funnily enough, there's lots of investing happening now, a lot of early stage investing as well, and going into the right stuff as well. So there's still dumb stuff getting funded, but less dumb stuff. The ratio's improved. Let's put it that way.
Well, and this is, I think, why we have VARs nowadays, right? Is because we need someone, and your podcast, not that you guys are a VAR, but you guys can kind of help people cipher through it. And I was actually going to say earlier, too, I think another benefit is that you've been around for a lot of time. So there's a lot of people like me who, again, I've been in the industry. I've been in tech since like you, early 2000s, but I've only been in security for 12, 13 years. But even still, those people have come up and now they're decision makers and they've been listening to your podcast for so long.
Funnily enough, that's exactly right. Like when I first started, it was a lot of technical people, but there wasn't really an industry back then, and then as the industry grew, like a lot of those people wound up becoming pretty important parts of it. And yeah, that's why the people who were listening maybe 15 years ago who were security-minded sysadmins, they're now chief security officers. So we've sort of grown up with our audience, I guess. We're going to have a LinkedIn page soon, right? Because
I have noticed you're a little light on the LinkedIn.
Well, and that's the thing, like, because we've kind of been anti that, man. We're too cool for LinkedIn, but we're going to do that, right? Because as I say, like, we've got that whole audience that came up in the early part of the industry and then sort of went the executive stream. But there's a lot of people who've never bloody heard of us, and they're all on LinkedIn.
So, and I was going to ask that too, is like, when you talk about getting to decision makers, is there something that you're able to identify that there are decision makers in your audience, or is it just go by general? There are. I mean, you hear it from sponsors. Like, I mean, it's incredible, right? Like some of the people we reach, and just, the feedback I get from the people who listen to it, like just anecdotally, I'll interview someone and, the people they tell me are like, hey, I heard you on Risky Business. And like, it's nuts. It's nuts. But I guess, and this always blew away Adam and I. Like I remember during, when was that? Like 2017 or something.
when we were talking about the executive orders that were coming out of the Trump White House, and they were the cybersecurity related executive orders, and they were all really sensible and well put together. And we're making jokes, Trump people hate us because we make a lot of Trump jokes on the show, right? Because he's not someone you would have associated with really good cybersecurity policy, but therein was one of the benefits of the Trump admin, though, is when it came to like quote unquote nerd stuff, he didn't care, right? He's like, yeah, okay, he'd hire someone competent. In that case, it was Rob Joyce. And just whatever, yeah, I'll sign it, whatever, not so interested. So we saw all of these great executive orders come out, and we were talking about that on the show, and then Rob Joyce, who's, sitting in the White House writing these executive orders, tweets, "Oh, I heard my name on Risky Biz. How cool." And we're like, wait, what? So that's the sort of thing. But, so it used to really spin us out. But then we realized like there's not really a great deal of content being produced out there that's targeted or suitable for those sort of people. So I guess ultimately it makes sense that we've attracted that sort of listener base. And I think that's the thing in publishing and content is, if you build it, they will come. If you create content designed to reach a certain type of person, that person will find it. Especially, once you hit a certain level of success or a certain level of reach, you become a bit of a, water cooler anchor, I guess, and away you go from there. So, yeah, we definitely do reach a lot of people in policy, government, law enforcement, intelligence, like the intelligence community in particular. Like it's insane the reach that Risky Business has in there.
Yeah, I love your shout outs to them from time to time when you're like, "Hello, guys."
Yeah, it's nuts,
We're
right?
talking about it.
Yeah, I was in. We recorded a podcast live at an NSA facility in the United States last year, and that was great. I got to meet some really interesting people, and yeah, just being around that area, around the sort of DC area, for like 10 days last year, that was an eye opener. But yeah, certainly a lot of people who work in for large enterprises doing security and stuff. So yeah, the audience is incredible. We're blessed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's to a lot of, again, your staying power. You've been around because I've seen podcasts. I've helped a couple security podcasts start up, and then they went, the way of the dodo. So
well, there was a long time where people used to say, "Oh, you don't have a job. You do a podcast. You don't have a job." And it's like, well, if you want it to be well researched, well reasoned, consistent. It actually is work.
Yeah, so, no, it is.
As you well know, right?
Yeah. I tell people, they're like, "Oh, what's a 30-minute episode?" I'm like, 3 hours, and that's outside of like doing actual research on stuff, and
doing the prep and then organizing the sponsorship and running the business.
Well, and I'm not even. I have a couple sponsors. They're a lot like you, where it's like, hey, close friends that are like willing. They have their own company or they're looking to promote something. So, and that's the thing too, is when I shot, like, I was starting to get people reach out to me. Like Alien Vault saying, "Do you want to have the CISO on from Alien Vault to talk about this?" So I started seeing where I could monetize it, but I was in a job that I really enjoyed, so I didn't do it, and got so stressful though balancing the job and this, I shut it down. But I brought it back with the idea of it becoming an own company. But a lot like you, I don't have these grandeur things of it suddenly blowing up. I expect that it's a lot of hard work, and this is like a 10-year plan that I could potentially move into and be self-employed, right?
Yeah. It was slow going.
Yeah.
Like the first, as I say, it was more benefactors. I think I was just lucky that a key group of like executives at vendors and whatever liked the show and wanted to keep listening to it, so they threw me their table scraps to keep me going.
That's all you need.
It's that old joke, right? It took me 10 years to be an overnight success, and it's Risky Biz definitely falls into that category. And funnily enough, like one of the reasons that it is successful is because I didn't really have any other career options. As I said, I moved to a small town on the east coast of Australia because at the time I surfed. I don't really surf anymore, but I used to surf. So I moved to Byron Bay and I'd be out there surfing and having a great time, and I didn't want to leave. So I'm thinking like, well, how can I, do something just to keep a roof over my head? And then it was the podcast. So I stopped doing some of the boring work, and then it became a full-time job, and it earned just enough money, like not great, to be honest, the first sort of 10 years, extremely not great, but enough to stop me from being tempted to move back to a city and get a job, as some evangelist working for a vendor or whatever. It was always just enough to keep me in it. So a bit of a gilded cage in a lot of ways. But, if I had lived in a city and been offered a job paying a real wage, I probably would have taken it. So I guess it's I was sort of lucky to be trapped in it for so many years. Yeah. That's how you become the incumbent, right?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
Just do it long enough.
So what's been your one of your favorite moments from the podcast that just kind of pops in your head?
Oh man, that's an impossible question to answer. It can be something as simple as Adam and I having a funny conversation. Like I always enjoy that when we're sort of locked in and having a laugh. That's always great. And then there's some of these high-profile interviews. My first interview with Rob Joyce back in the day, that was amazing. I think that was, 2018, 2019, something around there. I've interviewed a former Prime Minister on the show, Malcolm Turnbull. I've interviewed a bunch of government ministers in Australia, all sorts of people. So, some of those interviews really are high watermarks. But it's just, it's impossible to narrow it down even to a list because it's all, frankly, it's a blur. There's been over 1,000. We've done 758 weekly episodes, plus a zillion special editions. We've published, probably a couple thousand podcasts, right? So it's hard to narrow it down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So any closing thoughts, any recommendations for people wanting to get into podcast?
I will say it's easier now, right? So when I started, as I say, smartphones didn't even exist, right? So we pushed out our first episode, I think like around the same month that Apple launched the iPhone 1. And the audio equipment I needed was complicated. It was involved. It was hard. It was actually hard. And, my undergrad degree was in electronics engineering. And so I understand a bit about signals, and that actually came in handy back then. Now you don't need to know as much. You've got double-ender interview platforms. Riverside is the one that we use. We think it's excellent. So I'd say use Riverside. You can get yourself a simple dynamic USB mic. There's a Rode dynamic. I think it's called the Rode Podcaster. Cost you a couple $100. You get one of them and a set of headphones and a Riverside subscription. You can put together a reasonable podcast, and then you can host it on one of the million podcast hosting services out there, which again did not exist when I started this. So what involved custom development and setting up intricate audio rigs and all this sort of stuff, now it's a matter of spending a couple of $100 and using the right software. There's the Adobe podcast audio enhancing tool as well for rough caller audio. Like I used to have to do a lot of my interviews because, regional Australia 20 years ago, the internet connections here were terrible. So a lot of the interviews I would actually do over phone. I had to buy a rack mountable unit to separate my audio from caller audio. I bought it from a radio station in the United States that I think had gone bankrupt, and I somehow wound up with their equipment. You don't need any of that stuff anymore. So I'd say that the technical bar is quite low. I'd say publishing regularly is important. And I'd say my key bit of advice for anyone doing a podcast is this: nobody gives a shit what you did on the weekend. Nobody cares. Don't make it about yourself. Make it about your audience, what they want to know. That's the important thing, right? And you would notice that we don't waffle around. We're not like, every week I'm not like, hey, Adam, how you been? What did you get up to over the weekend? And no inside jokes. If you're sharing an inside joke, it's got to be one that the audience is in on. There's nothing wrong with a inside joke that a new listener might go, oh, okay, I don't quite get that. But it can't just be inside jokes between you and the host. So, just keep your focus on the listener. It's not a chance to show off. It's not a chance to be cool. It's a chance to sort of entertain and inform, post regularly and, keep going.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And to your point about equipment, I didn't even have a mixer because I didn't want to deal with the mixer. What I had was like 2 laptops, and I had they don't even make these anymore, an audio card that would record all of the audio. So I just got on one and just had that join and then just recorded all the audio from the thing. So yeah, it's definitely become a lot easier. And I love your recommendation about keeping, because that's what I try to focus on is the quality content. It's and that's where I love like guests like you. I mean, you and I, and is asking a really good question and getting the interviewee to talk as long as they will, right? Because yeah,
and sometimes, and I mean, I've had a lot more guests than you, so I don't know if you've run into this, but sometimes you run into a guest where they're just, it's just impossible to elicit anything from them, right? It's like that meme with the person poking something with a stick saying, come on, talk. Sometimes it's rough, right? But you know what I do? And here's a tip for you. If you ever encounter that situation, Tim, what you do is you keep talking to them. So you ask them the questions that you want answered, and they give you 3-word answers. But then you keep talking to them, keep talking. Mm-hmm. And what you'll find is people gradually open up and they warm up. And then you circle back, you start asking the earlier questions again, and then you get proper answers. And then all you have to do is chop the first part of the interview and just pick it up from where they're warmed up, right? So there's one pro tip for you for dealing with introverts who are, or having a heart attack while you're asking them questions.
Well, it's that or the short answers that you're like, I have like a list of questions, and it's like 5 minutes in, like we're done, and it's supposed to be like a 20-minute interview, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So circle around. That's my idea. Keep them going.
That's a really good idea.
You can even just have a more social conversation. Don't worry. Just talk to them for 10 minutes, and you'll find that they'll loosen up, and then you circle back. So that's a good tip for anyone out there dealing with interviewing someone who's perhaps feeling uncomfortable or just not very chatty. You can get there in the end. You can always get there in the end. Everybody's got something to say. It's your job to get them to say it.
Yeah. I mean, as a journalist too, right? It's don't ask yes or no questions. It's open-ended questions, right? Like how do you feel about this kind of question? I
mean, sometimes, right, I'll ask someone a question that isn't open-ended, and they'll say yes. Yeah. And then what I do is I say, tell me more. And then I just edit out the part where I say, tell me more. Oh, so it comes out as yes, blah, 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 blah. So it can really just be as simple as saying, do you want to expand on that a little?
That's brilliant. That's so good.
And then they do, and you just chop that out, So there's always a way.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Well, thank you for joining me to discuss risky business, man.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for letting me, crap on about myself for 40 minutes. It's been fun.